Hi everyone, welcome to Cabin Crafts and Simple Living, and today I'm going to do a fun video history of Chinoiserie, which is everything Chinese that early Americans were fascinated with. And I kind of got stuck on watching these Chinese costume dramas on YouTube. They're like 40 episodes long, and I've really gotten into them, and I've noticed some things that kind of correspond with early American colonial history that I thought it would be interesting to tell you. Now, I've gone to Colonial Williamsburg several times and other colonial sites, and so I've noticed specific Chinese influence in colonial America. So Chinese imports were actually in demand in the colonial period of America. It influenced our furniture and decor. It influenced our clothing. And it definitely influenced what we ate and drank and ate off of. So today I'm going to start with something that you've probably seen everywhere because they're still very popular today. And that is, I'm going to put on my glasses because I'm going to have to do a lot of reading. But these big things are, let me move the teapot out of the way. This is a ginger jar. And this is a ginger jar. This one is hand-painted porcelain. This is a koi fish on here. And this is from China. So this is porcelain, hand-painted, China, ginger jar. This is also a ginger jar made in China for Hobby Lobby. So you can see that the Chinese influence is still very relevant and popular today. And I'm even wearing my blue and white clothing. And speaking of blue and white, some of you, your grandmothers out there, might have blue willow china patterns. And that started in the 18th century and was very popular with early America. But these are called ginger jars because they were used to hold ginger and exotic spices. So when you go to Colonial Williamsburg, for instance, and you go in the apothecary shop, you will see big ginger jars like this lining the shelves, and it will have labels on the front with different medicinals in there and herbs and spices. So these are still going strong. But in the 18th century, I'm going to give you a little bit of history. In the 18th century, the empire in China was the Qing dynasty. It ruled China from 1644 to 1912. It was a period of significant prosperity and expansion. And the Qing dynasty is considered the last imperial dynasty in China. If you want to watch a good movie about the very end of the Qing dynasty, you need to watch the movie The Last Emperor. It won all kinds of Academy Awards. But the 18th century time period fell during what is known as China's Golden Age. And so we're going to talk about 1776. So the year 1776 falls within the era known as the High Qing period because of the increase in China's power and influence in our region throughout the time period. In 18th century America, Chinese influence primarily manifested through trade and the popular fashion of chinoiserie, which is a French word that means it was the Western interpretation of Chinese art and style. And direct contact with China was limited by the British East India Company. Now you need to remember that name because it involves tea and a famous Boston Tea Party. But colonists developed a taste for Chinese goods like tea, so we have tea, porcelain, and of course silk. And so this led to a desire for goods and designs that were interpreted and adapted in the American colonies. And it created a unique blend of Western, Eastern influences. I noticed when I went to Thomas Jefferson's Monticello that the railings along some of his walks are Chinese influence architecture. Park benches, you'll notice that lattice work, that is Chinese influence. It also, we'll talk about these things in another video, but silk and tea, these were the three main trade things from China, was porcelain, tea, and silk. So China's involvement in the revolution, they didn't really take sides, but it was involved in goods and trade. Tea, porcelain, and silk were quite popular in the colonies, And that would be the center of some of the colonial protest movements. Of course, the tea protest. China was the main global producer of all three: porcelain, tea, and silk. And so tea, most famously, would be tossed into Boston Harbor in 1773. The British Empire had established trade connections with the Qing dynasty over a century earlier in 1672. But the emperor had very little interest in a deepening relationship with those he saw and described as barbarians. So anyone outside of the Chinese empire was considered a barbarian. The Romans did the same thing. Anyone that wasn't Roman was a barbarian. The emperor's attitude toward other nations aligned with China's view of its place in the world. The title of Celestial Empire was used by the Chinese and later by Europeans and Americans for the country. Another term was Heavenly Dynasty, or a dynasty mandated by heaven to rule. So China thought they were the center of the universe, literally. China had a intricately bureaucratic government system. They did not like outsiders, and they didn't want to deal with outsiders, but they wanted the trade. So the British East India Company was dealt with through one specific merchant guild on the island of Canton. And so the British merchants were restricted to conducting all their business in Canton. Goods in China were produced for all parts of the British Empire, but colonists in the Americas did not trade directly with the Chinese due to mercantile laws and regulations imposed by Great Britain since the 17th century. We could not directly trade, while we were colonies, we could not directly trade with another country for their goods. It had to go through Great Britain. And that's how they controlled everything. It wouldn't be until after the Revolutionary War in 1784 that an American merchant ship would begin trade with China for the new United States. So in 18th century, these ginger jars, primarily of Chinese origin, were highly sought after decorative items. They reflected a growth and fascination with chinoiserie. Like I said, that means the fascination and the want of anything from China. They were originally for storing spices, but they became symbols of wealth and status. Chinese porcelain was highly prized, and they tried to make, different countries tried to reproduce Chinese porcelain, but they kept that as a closely guarded secret. And so there was one in Philadelphia, an American porcelain company that lasted only 3 years, and then it was no more. It just was not the same quality as Chinese porcelain. So Chinese porcelain was luxury. It was controlled by European merchants, and porcelain, especially teaware and dinnerware, transported to American ports, was consumed by affluent households. I'm going to give you just one example. So we all know George Washington, and he's got some beautiful porcelain in his collection at Mount Vernon. He's got a gorgeous punch bowl that's very Chinese looking, that they would put punch in. And I went on Mount Vernon's website and I looked at George Washington's porcelain. His first shipment of porcelain from England came in 1758 from a London merchant. Blue and white china was typical of the fashionable porcelain of the 18th century. Washington was so fond of this type of porcelain and ordered it on 9 occasions. His first order of blue and white porcelain arrived in April 1763, and this shipment consisted of 1 complete set of table china, fine blue and white, consisting of 11 long dishes or serving dishes, 24 plates, 12 soup bowls, 1 tureen, cover and dish, 4 sauce boats, and 4 salts. To pay for his orders from England, Washington, like most Virginia planters, sent their tobacco crops to London and to London merchants. The London merchant would set the price, tell them how much money it was worth, and then they could get goods through England sent back for their tobacco. So their tobacco was like cash. So they would order these luxury items from England with their merchants that was back in England that was receiving their tobacco, and then they would get goods. Washington ordered toys for Martha's children. all sorts of stuff all the time. Of course, he was ordering things for the slaves. He would order clothing. But so they sent their tobacco, and then they got goods in return. In fact, this became such a habit with Virginia's planting elite, with the plantation owners, that a lot of them wound up heavily in debt because they wanted so many luxury goods that they actually spent more money than they had. And they would wind up with lots of credit and go bankrupt. And then so to assure Americans continued access to Chinese porcelain and other desirable imports, a new trade route was necessary in the post-revolutionary era. An American ship, the Empress of China, captained by John Green, set sail from New York City for Canton on Washington's birthday, February 22nd, 1784, at a cost of $120,000. Captain Shaw, Samuel Shaw, and his Empress of China returned to New York on May 11, 1785. On board were tea, fabrics, cassia, which is also cinnamon, and roughly 64 tons of porcelain. By 1790, America had sent 28 ships to Canton. So between 1784 and 1790, America had sent 28 ships in 6 years to Canton, China. If you should be in want of a new set of china, it is in my power to procure a very genteel set, fellow Virginian Henry Lighthorse Harry Lee informed Washington, who ended up purchasing a 302-piece set from Henry Lee. So the first direct trade relationship between the United States and China was established. So, you know, we get a lot of things nowadays, today, and when it says made in China, and we think of that as, you know, I don't want anything made in China. It's cheap. Now we have the tariff war going on. But, you know, what fascinates me about this is how this is still going fairly strong. I mean, I walked into Hobby Lobby and picked up this ginormous ginger jar. This one was not as expensive as this one because this one is the real thing. It's hand painted. You got the little koi fish on there. I think this one is just beautiful. But so is this one. So you can either spend a lot of money or you can spend a little money and still get the same look. I mean, this is very popular in kitchens as canister sets. It's still going strong. People are still buying blue and white willow china. That pattern is 250 years old. It's just amazing how this really hasn't changed, and the fascination that Americans have with Chinese goods. And even though people will even come into my shop, I don't have a lot of Chinese made in here. I do have some imports, but not a lot. I try to keep as much American made in my shop as I can, but it's not necessarily a bad thing sometimes. And so, you know, the best porcelain, the best tea, and the best silk still comes from China. So in our next video, I will talk more about tea, and that the Chinese call cha. So tea is pronounced cha in Chinese. So this is the can that I have that was popular during colonial times, and this was the most tea that went into Boston Harbor. This is Colonial Boohee. So that's another name for tea. So the next video, we're going to talk about tea. And then the video after that, we're going to talk about how silk influenced American fashion in the 18th century. I find these things so fascinating that these same things that are going on are still happening 250 years later. So I hope you all enjoyed this little video about Chinese imports during the colonial period, and look forward to the next 2 videos. If you would please, it would help me a lot if you could just comment or give us a like and subscribe if you're not subscribed, and I will try to keep making more videos. Thank you for watching.